Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the use of Universal Design of Learning, UDL strategies to design online skills-based training to meet the diverse learning needs of employees. My name is Mary Kay Taylor, and I will be taking you through the requirements of my presentation. My presentation agenda today includes 5 key topics. The first one is the Introduction Presentation Framework, the research topic, problem and questions, challenges and assumptions of the presentation, trends in technology literature review, and the summary and recommendations. First, we're going to talk about the topic, what is Universal Design for Learning? And then I would like to talk to you about the presentation framework. This presentation is going to be from a consultative model, meaning that initially we were required to identify an organization and identify a problem and attempt to research and recommend solutions for that problem. Since I work in academia, my focus was the corporate arena, the corporate training arena. So my perspective and my approach to this presentation and this research project is going to be that of a consultant. The reason for doing this is because I would like to move into the corporate arena, the corporate training arena, and this gives me the opportunity to expand and to meet a dissertation goal that I had set for myself. So in this perspective, we won't be talking about an individual organization. Rather, we'll be looking to identify an organization that could potentially use UDL strategies. In order to really define and determine what UDL is, we need to really understand the concept of equality versus equity. And when we think of universal design for learning, it is the design of products, environments, and communication to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without adaptation or specialized design. And I found this graphic that really illustrates the concept of UDL. And the first example on the left, you see that everyone is given the same accommodation. It's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same support. So we give everyone a box in which to see over the fence in order to have equitable viewing. The second image in the middle is the individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. So in other words, the first person didn't require any support, the second one required a little bit of support, and the third one required a significant more support. They're all being treated equitably. In the third example, we see that all three can see the game without any supports or accommodation, because instead of addressing the learner, we address the barrier. When we remove the barrier, the fence, we now have the ability for these students to reach their goals. The second example and definition of UDL that I wanted to provide was really changing the curriculum and the teaching approach modification, not the learner adapted to meet the curriculum. In other words, we're going to adapt the curriculum and our teaching to meet the needs of the learner, not changing the learner to meet the curriculum. And as you can see in this example, we're given all the same test and we're expecting everyone to get there all in the same manner. Now, when it comes to the research topic, I have 3 fundamental questions that I set out to try to solve. The first one is, do the traditional workplace learning accommodations proposed in the current literature work to address diverse learning needs? The second question is, what happens to those employees who received learning and educational or instructional accommodations throughout their educational experiences now that they're in the workplace and those accommodations may not be available to them? And the third question which is a combination of both of the prior questions, is does the use of UDL strategies in the design of online skills-based training meet those diverse learning needs of employees? In other words, could we use UDL to meet and answer the questions for both of these? So our literature themes, and I have found that there are two research findings that are important when we're looking at implementing UDL. The first is learning about adults with learning disabilities within the workforce. Much of the research related to this topic really looks at those adults in the workforce that have severe learning disabilities or medical diagnoses of cognitive disorders, things like ADHD, autism, Asperger's syndrome. And according to the Learning Disabilities website, Learning Disabilities in the Workplace article really defines learning disabilities as an impairment of neurological origin that impacts on specific areas of learning. And the literature further suggests that there's confusion between these disorders and people who have learning disabilities. Which really begs the question then, is learning disabilities, as suggested by Dr. McNichols, is an umbrella term for learning problems relating to the processing of math, reading, and communication. And that's really where I want to focus my research efforts, is to really understand how we work with those who may have issues with processing math, reading, and communication. The second theme deals more with the current instructional design practices, which has a focus on, or an emphasis on, learning accommodation or adaptation. Again, we're going to adapt the learner to the curriculum, not the curriculum to the learner. Most corporate training programs that I found in the literature design their programs for the average learner, or a one-size-fits-all model. We can offer that in different formats, but essentially it's based on the average learner. And then we deal with the learner who requires different learning models as a separate process in a separate forum. There needs to be buy-in and support from management, and management needs to have a perception for the need and importance of training. If there's an organizational culture that management perceives training as unimportant, a necessary evil, and is not willing to dedicate the time and resources and the importance and budgeting to it, then there's not the opportunity to realize the greatest benefit from training. UDL is widely used in all facets of academia with documented research and instructional models. There are many models of how UDL has been used in academia. Unfortunately, there has not been a whole lot of discussion of UDL in the corporate arena, and that's again what I'm hoping to address through this research study. Perceptions of the instructional designers and their reluctance to deviate and or change from their present process. So they are project focused. They will design to this average learner, all the same curriculum, all the same assessment, and there seems to be an emphasis or reliance on technology as our cure-all and meeting any diverse learning needs. So if we can find a technological solution that will help meet those that are not within that average worker model, then that's what is used. The relevant management theories, there are two. The first one is Peter Senge's Characteristics of Learning Organizations. And Karim, in 2016, wrote an article using Senge's Characteristics of Learning Organizations in his article about influence of leadership in building a learning organization. And it really related to the organization's continually expanding its capacity to learn, its reinvention, if you will, the reinvention of itself and its capacity to learn from its mistakes, learn new ways of doing things, and certainly ways of innovating. The article discusses the type of organizational leader qualities and culture required to meet the definition of Senge's vision of a learning organization. And this is key because, again, there's a heavy reliance, as we discussed prior in the literature, about the role of management in the success of training. Adaptation requires scalability. If an organization is going to expand and be elastic when it comes to its capacity to learn, universal design of learning main premise is changing the curriculum to be scalable, to be individualized, to meet the needs of the learner. So in a learning environment, this becomes very relevant that learning organizations are more likely to embrace required instructional design paradigm shift to UDL than other such organizations because they're built to adapt, they're built to learn, they're built to learn from learning. The second management theorist that relates to my study is Kurt Lewin and his change management theories specific to the unfreeze, change, and refreeze, and the plan for change methodology. If you can see what is coming next, you're better able to plan for it. This is essentially the crux of what I'm proposing with the use of UDL. If we unfreeze, we challenge the way in which we deliver training. We're going to challenge the structure and the role of the instructional designer. We're going to change. We're going to recognize the need for change. We're going to look at the core of how and why training is delivered and create a climate for change. We need to demonstrate the return on investment. More so, how does it help the instructional designer? How does it help the instructional design process? And ultimately, how does it help the organization to learn? And then the refreezing is the implementation and the small successes. If we have more engagement in learning, we reduce and we have less barriers to learning, which then helps us build a more diverse workforce. Now, there are some challenges here that will need to be overcome in order to be successful. And the key ones from this slide are really identifying those who require various learning needs, who are going to require a different approach to learning. There's a fear in identifying yourself potentially as somebody who requires a little bit different of an approach to learning, a fear of reprisals, a fear of retaliation. Many learning disabled are not required to report that they have a learning disability, or they simply may not know that they require a different approach. The literature describes this as being not visible or a hidden disability. The second challenge we have is our current instructional design, not only our practices, but the changing role of the instructional designer. Again, we talked about writing to this or creating training to the invisible average student, and then we'll deal with the alternative learner later on. We'll use the same delivery method, whether it works for everyone or not. The present practice is to accommodate for the student, not the curriculum. We might have a heavy reliance on technology in order to deliver training versus delivering and using different models. And instructional designers operate in silo perspectives. Our third challenge is with the online skills-based training. Many times skills-based training is static in nature with very little to no employee engagement. Some processes rapidly change. There needs to be a good understanding of the process. If we don't understand the process as instructional designers, we may use ineffective teaching methods. Instructional designers, again, are in that standardized and one-size-fits-all methodology. So the summaries and recommendations from the research, I'm proposing that we build a consultative model with the instructional design team. Make instructional designers learning consultants, where they would essentially be embedded within the process that they are going to design. They would learn the culture and the learning differences within the teams that they support with their learning. They will identify learning barriers. They'll consider current technology and how best they can be leveraged for all people. Current technologies that we use in our everyday lives, like a cell phone, like GPS. They will to work to find organizational benefits and return on investment. And the last one is to identify an organizational structure and culture where UDL strategies would be most effective. Conclusions. There are 4 key conclusions that we can take away from this research project to date. First, implementing UDL will shift the paradigm in instructional design thinking. UDL is widely used in academic setting, but not widely used or researched in the corporate arena. And again, this project aims to solve that. Learning organizational culture is most likely to embrace new changes brought about by implementing UDL. So we would want to look to try to identify a learning organization that may be able to recognize and realize the benefits of UDL. And with the use of UDL, global organizations can realize greater learning opportunities for their employees and potentially creating more innovation. And I'm including here the references if you have any questions and would like to read more. Thank you and have a great evening.